Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
And he's going to talk on cryptographic extraction. Over to you, Hugo.
Thank you. Good night. 4 a.m. in here. Okay, so the only thing that stayed the same is the name of the speaker. I changed the title and the affiliation from the program. Okay, so in many places, the applications in computer science, we need randomness. Some of them require randomness crucially, otherwise you cannot achieve some functionalities. Just turn the mic off. Okay. Good night again. So in cryptography, certainly we cannot live without randomness, and actually not just randomness, we need a source of secret randomness. However, in practice, many times we don't have these perfect sources of randomness, but we have sources with some entropy. For example, when you sample bits, random bits from the operating system or users' keystrokes, that certainly this is not perfect uniformly, but you assume that there is some entropy, and some entropy that is left even after the attacker knows some of the information that is there, and in some cases it can even feed some of information into the computer. And we have this in many other cases, biometric data and key derivation functions, key exchange, that will be my main example here. And then the question is, can we convert imperfect sources of randomness into good enough? I mean, it's close to uniform. And this question was studied in different contexts. In complexity theory, Nissan and Zuckerman in '96 came up with this very nice formulation of the notion of randomness extraction, and where the randomness extractor is an algorithm that gets two values. One is an X, which is a string with imperfect secrecy. I mean, there is something about it that is unknown. And also a seed, which is public but random. And you combine these two things through this extractor to get an extracted key that we denote R here, but also we output the seed from the input. And the reason is that what we want to claim is that this R that we extracted, okay, this value R, is statistically close to uniform even when you know the seed S. And you need that because in practice the seed will be known, so you want this closeness, statistical closeness, to hold even when the attacker or the observer knows the seed S. Now, in order for these two things to be really statistically close, you need enough entropy on your source. I will mention that in a moment. And these randomness extractors have really many uses in complexity theory. Amazing how useful this tool is. And actually we'll show that also in cryptography for key derivation is very useful, and in last years this has been used for everything. Fully homomorphic, circular security. I mean, every buzzword will have some extractor somewhere. But we will focus on key derivation. Now, the extractor will have several parameters that I will use. One is mean entropy. Mean entropy is a notion of entropy different than Shannon's. What it means that a source of randomness has mean entropy M if the most common element in the support has probability at most 2 to the minus m. In other words, the best guess of an element from the source is you will be able to guess with probability no more than 2 to the m. We will use m to denote the mean entropy, n to denote the output from the extractor, which will be our keys, and the error epsilon, which counts the statistical distance between two distributions. In our case, the extractor output from the uniform, and statistical distance is defined as the maximum over all distinguisher, all algorithms, even computationally unbounded ones, that observe either this side, this probability distribution, or in our case, the uniform distribution. And so in other words, you look at the space, the probability space, and on one hand you look at a set of points with uniform values in it, and on the other hand you see the same set but with the probabilities as induced by the output of the extractor, and you see the difference between these two, and in no case that should be more than epsilon, and if that happens, when we say that these distributions are epsilon closed. Now, there is a theorem, an important theorem, showing that if you have m entropy in your input n output bits, then we first call the difference between m and n is the entropy loss, okay, of the input entropy and the output entropy. We call that L for loss. And it is known that you cannot get better statistical distance than 2 to the minus L over 2. That's the optimum that you can get, and we know how to get exactly that amount of that closeness. Okay, so remember m the entropy and L the loss that will play an important role here. Ideally, we would like to get all of the m entropy into m uniform bits. We cannot do that. We must live with some loss of entropy. Now, since this is a talk about how practical or impractical is cryptography, so let me give you some stories from the past. So in '96 or around that time, I was involved in the cryptographic design of IPsec and IKE. IKE is the IPsec key exchange, and the key exchange was, the working group wanted to have perfect forward secrecy, so we had to do an authenticated Diffie-Hellman. I have done too much work on authenticated Diffie-Hellman protocols, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is about the key derivation part. So you run the protocol, you get at the end a g to the xy, which is the key derived from the two parties. And now you want to derive a session key, but the session key is in order to use for an encryption, a MAC. So you want something which is uniform. You don't want something which is maybe uniform over some group. You want actually a string of n bits which are close to uniform. And of course, there is an obvious way of doing this. You take a hash function, treat it as a random function. You pray that everything will work, and you hash g to the xy and some information related to your session, and you hope that this is fine. This is not necessarily bad, but it can be bad depending on your use of the things. So one first objection is that let's try not to treat the hash function as an ideal random function, in particular because this hash function, no hash function is a random oracle, but these ones, there are things that we know explicitly that are bad as random oracles. For example, there are extension attacks, and since this g to the xy usually goes, at least in '96, these were 1,000 bits over ZP star, then this goes beyond just one block of the hash function, so issues of extension already are relevant. And there are other problems with that. For example, bad interactions with other uses of the hash function in the protocol. So let me give you this example. There was a protocol that a predecessor of IKE, one of the first proposals to do the key exchange, it was called Futuris. Now, the Futuris, in order to authenticate the g to the xy, sent a signature of g to the xy over the wire, so you could see that. Of course, this was done with RSA, so clearly you can take this signature, raise it to the public exponent e, and get back g to the xy. No, not g to the xy, people told me. It's h of g to the xy that you're getting. So it's not g to the xy. All right, I don't like that, but that's true. Now, on the other hand, the derived key was h of g to the xy concatenated with info, right? But so you have h g to the xy. Now, the way these Merkle-Damgard hash functions work is that if this is a multiple of 512 bits, basically if you know hg to the xy, you know all of these, right? Because these will be the compression function with the IV set to h of g to the xy and then apply to the info. And lucky for the theoreticians and bad luck for the engineers, g to the xy was exactly 1024 bits. So it was not a theoretical attack, it was an actual attack. But anyway, the point is that, you know, many of the things, you know, CBC mode at the time of TLS, there were complaints. You know, Phil Rogie was telling the world from at least 94, 95, you shouldn't do that. Well, sometimes if you don't have the attacks, it's hard to convince the people. Here there was a little bit more of attacks. Okay, so we don't want to use H. So what do? Well, a natural thing to do is to take g to the xy and use it as a key to a PRF. So PRF with key g to the xy applied to info. That sounds like more sound, but g to the xy is not a uniform key. So what can you say about a PRF that uses a key which has some randomness in it but is not uniform? So that's one question. But then there's another question which is a more operational question, is which PRFs actually let you input a key of size 1000 bits? So for example, if you want to do AES or DES, triple DES, they, you know, how do you put 1024 bits key into one of these algorithms? They don't even define. In the case of HMAC, which was considered then as a MAC, then the situation was better because HMAC was defined in a way that you can put a key of any length. Why? Because if you put more than 512 bits of key, what HMAC does, it applies H to the key and now uses HMAC with that output from H. So look what happens. Actually, using HMAC in this case is an illusion because again, g to the xy was 1000 bits. So actually, what did happen is that HMAC will apply hg to the xy, and then basically the key, you know, is again this g to the xy, which it's not a real key, right? So, but even worse, because of the way HMAC works, it takes hg to the xy to be the key. So if you use it for the case of Photuris, which did disclose h to the gxy, then again, this is broken. Okay, because if you know hg to the xy, then you can compute HMAC on that thing. Again, showing that things are subtle and you should try to understand better what you are doing. And here is a place where theory comes to the rescue, at least in a way which, in one of the ways in which theory is most practical. Not necessarily as telling you exactly what is the algorithm or protocol that you're going to use, but giving you the concepts and the methodology to try to extract from the theory things that you will use in practice. So clearly what we need here is you have a source of key material, in this case g to the xy, and you want to output an almost uniform key. So it's exactly the setting of an extractor, and the issue is that extractor needs a source with enough mean entropy and also a random but not secret seed. So how does that apply to Ike? So the answer is that yes, because under the DDH assumption, g to the xy has enough entropy. Actually, statistical entropy, it has 0, because the attacker knows g to the x, g to the y, so g to the xy is determined, its statistical entropy is 0. But there is this notion of computational entropy that we can use, which means that it's not that much entropy, but it's indistinguishable from something that has enough entropy. So that was fine. And for the random seed, in the case of key exchanges, it was easy because parties exchange all kind of stuff, so they exchange some nonces, and from this nonsense you can derive a random value which we serve as the seed. So the idea was, okay, actually we had to generate many keys. Encryption, MAC, directional keys, all kind of things. But of course, the only thing that you really care is about the first PRF key, because once you have a PRF key, you can expand the key material as much as you want. So this is what gives rise to what I call extract then expand KDF, a first stage in which the key for the PRF is extracted out of the source of keying material, and then other keys are derived using an expansion function using the PRF with this key. Any variable length output PRF will be useful in that case for doing that. Now, the nice thing about this stuff is that I haven't done anything which is specific to Diffie-Hellman or key exchange. You can use this construct. I mean, this is not a construction, but it's general scheme in many situations. Also, when beyond the key exchange. But the question still remains: how do we implement the extractor? And the answer in this case theory gives you the exact and not a bad at all answer. Randomness extractors exist, and they are efficient and simple. Okay, any strongly universal hash function or pairwise independent hash function is a good extractor. That was proven and is called the leftover hash lemma. So we have good extractors. However, there were, for several reasons, these were not appropriate for that setting. One is that these things, extractors need more entropy than we usually had available. For example, if you wanted to produce a key of 128 bits with a security of 2 to the 80, you would need the entropy to be 2 to the 88. So, even if you had a 260-bit subgroup, let's say an elliptic curve or a 256-bit Schnorr subgroup, then you could not get a SHA-1 key with these parameters. And I'll show more numerical examples in a moment. And also it requires long seeds, at least of the length of the input, in this case 1,000 bits, and even though these parties exchange bits, no one really wanted to put 1,000 bits going from one side to another just for this nonsense. And then there is a third reason, which is maybe more important than everything else, is that these extractors are not in the crypto libraries, not in the hardware, and people want to use whatever was there. Even worse, it was not even in Schneier's book. So, and it's not easy to sell fancy cryptography. Even now, 15 years ago, it was much more of a struggle. So I was pushing stuff, but this was a little bit too much. So the idea was, let's try to still use PRFs for the extractor, even though we saw that there are problems. And now the idea was to swap instead of G to the XY as a key and some salt as an input, let's use the key to be salt. And salt, I use it as a synonym of a random but known string. So let's have such a string as the key and G to the XY as the input. Now, if the PRF was a good extractor, that would be exactly what you have to do. But what can you say about a PRF that has a known key? Nothing. Okay? Nothing. All the definition of PRF depends completely on the key being secret. So you cannot say. But I thought the hope, and that was really my hope, I cannot blame anyone else, was that for specific PRFs, in particular HMAC, CBCMAC, these will be a good approximation of extractors. Of course, under some assumptions. Now, the truth is that I had some ideas of why and how this may work, but actually it took me and co-authors several years to make formal sense of this. Okay. So I don't recommend in general to do these kind of things. It's better to know what you are doing, but at the time we didn't know much what we were doing, and I still thought that this was not worse than using the hash as a random oracle. With a random oracle, you could justify these things, but I was hoping that you can do something better. Okay, so you can implement this. Okay, so again, it's not true that for every PRF this will be a good extractor. Okay, we have examples, counter examples, at least not natural counter examples. We have counter examples of constructions that you will put the PRF with the salt as the key, and the output is completely distinguishable from uniform. Okay, so but here the proposal was to do it specifically with HMAC and with CBC-MAC. CBC-MAC, these things we analyze them at some point. CBC-MAC also has some properties, but HMAC is I mean, what we can say about HMAC as an extractor is stronger than what we can say about CBC-MAC. This eventually, after I did the things starting in 2007, people were asking me about how to do key derivation functions. So I went back to that design, and I wrote this as a standard or an RFC in the ITF. Now it's also a NIST document for that. And also I published a paper in Crypto 10 explaining all the things and all the rationale. And what you can say, I mean, these kind of things that I explain, is that not only these are quite good as extractors when you have salt, but actually these function as things that a statistical extractor will not help. Things like applications that require random oracle. There are some key exchange protocols that they don't work with an extractor. They really need a random oracle because that's the only way you can prove the security. And if you put a statistical extractor, I mean, you cannot even assume that this behaves as a random oracle. Then we have situations in you need to extract bits not from actual mean entropy, but from unpredictability, what we call hardcore predicate or hardcore bits, and applications that don't have randomness for the seed, in which case, again, the theory of randomness extraction, you cannot use it, but we can use some crypto assumptions to somehow justify the use of this HKDF for different purposes. Each time that you actually have a key derivation situation. Now, notice that when I talk about all the things, this stuff is not, even under the assumptions and whatever, you're never proving that what you are outputting, or actually it's not true, but most of the time you are not proving that you output bits that are statistically close to uniform. What you prove is that the output is computationally close to uniform, meaning that for bounded distinguishers, they cannot see the difference between the output and uniform. And for crypto applications, usually is what we need. So actually, this is what I said. A computational extractor is a randomness extractor that receives computationally bounded distinguishers. And in the first slide, I show you that statistical distance means that no distinguisher can distinguish between the extractor and uniform more than some epsilon, and that definition was for all distinguishers, also computationally unbounded. For this definition, we actually say our distinguishers are only computationally bounded. And HMAC and NMAC have some good computational extraction properties. Let me just mention to give you a flavor of the things. So, for example, so it's not too hard to derive properties assuming that the compression function is random. So we have some results of that type. But also I wanted to show that we have also results which don't idealize the hash function. For example, if the family of hash functions is in itself a good extractor, and certainly if we want to think about them as random functions, then in particular they are good extractors, but actually you could have a real collision-resistant hash function that is provable an extractor. Actually, I wished that in this Shastri competition, these kind of things would have been emphasized. Unfortunately, they won't, because it's very hard to prove things about these hash functions, but you should be able actually to argue that your compression family has good extraction properties or universal hashing properties. Anyway, if your family has these properties and it's also a PRF, like as it is assumed for proving HMAC, then NMAC is a good extractor, but not on any source of mean entropy, what we call blockwise mean entropy, which means every block, in this case 512, has enough entropy, for example, 160 bits. So every block of your input needs to have 160 bits of entropy. And that, for example, is applicable to what IPsec was doing, which was using safe primes of length 1028. You can prove that that source has these properties. So you had a proof in Ike of using this HKDF that didn't assume anything ideal about the hash function. If you truncate the output, for example, you use SHA-512 to extract the first key and then SHA-256 to expand the key, then again you can prove without any random oracles a very good bound on the security of the thing. And if you assume stronger properties of compression function, you can get better things, in which case, you know, if you are going to assume things about the hash function, you should assume the randomness property on the compression function, not on the iterated function. Anyway, there is a paper, I mean, my paper from Crypto 10 explains the things. The actual technical part of proving these things is in a 2004 paper. Okay, so, but let's go back now to statistical extractors. I said that actually statistical extractor, the true thing, okay, not this abuse of cryptography that I was doing, this real thing that you can mathematically prove from beginning to end, they are quite practical, but they have some practical limitations. One is they require a large gap. For example, if you want to derive a 128-bit key with 128-bit security, you will need to start with entropy of more than 384. So today, if you wanted to use a elliptic curve to do that, you should go to something. I mean, you cannot use elliptic curve 256 and be able to claim anything, you know? So the nice thing about statistical extractor is that everything is provable, but it's provable as long as the assumptions on the entropy actually hold. If you go for less data entropy, actually this doesn't tell you anything. Okay, in some cases it tells you that actually the statistical distance is bad. So that's one problem. Another problem is that it requires a large number of salt bits. The random seed that you need for the extractors are long. There are theoretical results showing that you can have a short seed, but you have to decide between a short seed and an impractical construction, or a practical construction and a longer seed, and that's what we would do. So we would need a few hundreds or a couple of thousand bits of salt. So that's another problem. And I also mentioned things which are that randomness extractors were not intended to do, like getting random bits just from assumption of unpredictability, and the issue of code unavailability is still a case. Even in the second edition of Schneider, this doesn't show up. So anyway. But you know, I'm just joking, but the truth is that this is serious stuff. I mean, the engineers are right when they say, you know, I have my hardware chip doing SHA, whatever. It's enough that they have to go and now do SHA-56. Don't tell me that they have to do other stuff too. I mean, I tell them, but doesn't help. Okay, but 1 and 2 is nothing that we can blame anyone else. 1 and 2 are inherent limitations of statistical extractors. And why inherent? I already said that there is the RT-bound Radhakrishnan and Tashma proved that 2 to the minus L over 2, where L is the difference between the actually that's wrong, it's M minus N. M is the entropy and N is the output. So if I have that in some other places, L will always be M minus N. As I said, this is unavoidable for extractors, and as I said before, this has a cost, a practical cost, As for the seed, again, there are these lower bounds. In practical sense, we are talking about a seed of in a 1024-bit G to XY, you will have 1000 bits. If you have 2048 more, if you have the elliptic curve, it will be a few hundreds. So it's still quite a lot. Okay, is this inherent? I said yes, it is inherent because there are lower bounds. Can we do anything about it? Had you asked me this after 2 years ago, I would say no, no way. You know, the complexity people, they know what they are doing. You cannot do better. But ask me again, can we do anything about these inherent limitations? So, following our president, yes, we can. So, yeah, so we can. So, what does that mean? Am I proving the complexity theory people wrong? No, that's not what happens here. Is that we are asking a question which is more limited and more geared towards our application, and happily you can get a better answer when you formulate the right answer, the right question in this case. So we have the famous leftover hash lemma that tells us that if you have a family of universal hash functions, which means a family like that is a family in which you take any two inputs, you fix any two inputs of your choice. Now you choose a hash function from the family at random and you apply it to x and to y, then there may be a collision, but there is a small probability of collision, okay? And actually in this case the collision will be 2 to the minus n, where n is the length of the output. And there is the paper, the famous Hill paper, Hastad in Pagliazzo, Levin, Lubitsch, showing that actually any function, any family like this gives you a good extractor with good actually with optimal parameters. Okay, the epsilon, the statistical distance that they can prove, is the best possible with the bounds, with the RT bound. However, if we use it, for example, you start with an 106-bit elliptic curve and you want to produce 128 bits, then what you have as the entropy loss is 160 less 128, that's 32, and the bound is 2 to the minus L2. Where is that? Yeah. Okay, I cannot even do that. So it's there, that epsilon. So if you put 2 to the minus L over 2, you get 2 to the minus 16. So you use an extractor, everything is nice. You know that it's not worse than 2 minus 6 to the minus 16, but that gives you leaves you a security of 16 bits. Not very nice. Even if you start with 256 bits to 160 bits, you still get something 2 minus 48. Basically, it means that we have too much degradation of security. But again, it's optimal. So what this means is that the best guarantee that we can have is that any algorithm that succeeds on doing something with probability epsilon, it will succeed with probability epsilon plus 2 to the minus L over 2. When the guy succeeding is the attacker, this means that 2 to the minus L over 2 is your security degradation, and you want to make it smaller, not something like 2 to the minus 16. Okay, but here is the trick. Here is how you have to ask the question. The question is, these lower bounds and this statistical distance happens when you look at the entire space. What about if we only consider events that happen with very low probability? For example, an attacker that finds your AES key, some attack like that, will succeed with, we hope, with very small probability, okay? With probability 2 to the minus 80. Now we're going to add 2 to the minus 16, killing the security of the thing. But since we only care about that attacker that wins in a very, very small part of the space, for the probabilistic space, then we have hope of doing better. And here is what we prove. By the way, this is a paper with many authors from Crypto 11. And what we prove actually is that if before you had epsilon plus 2 to the minus L over 2, now you have epsilon plus square root of epsilon times 2 to the minus L over 2, which means that now your security degradation is less bad than before, And let me jump to some examples. For example, in the example that I talked before, elliptic curve 160 to 128-bit AES key, if you assume that AES has security to the minus 96 in key search, then before we had only 2 to the minus 16 security that we proved with the statistical extractor. Now we can claim 2 to the minus 64 for the case of an 160 HMAC SHA-1 key derived from 256. Before we had 2 to the minus 48, now we have 2 to the minus 88. And actually, this gets even better. Even if you do an extraction that the loss, okay, the gap is negative, I mean, you win bits, you don't lose bits. You have 160 bits of entropy and you go to 256 bits. This bound, this generalized leftover hash lemma actually gives you some meaningful result. For example, in this case, if you assume that HMAC with SHA-256 has security of 200, then you get, even if you added more bits than entropy, you still get a meaningful bound of 2 to the minus 52, which, by the way, in this case, that bound is a statistical bound. It's not a computational. That is the, I mean, for any distinguisher, it cannot do better than that. Okay, now have 10 minutes? You mean you doubt between 10 and 15, or? We have a lower bound of 10 here. So, and in practice we can. So this result that I showed you worked because the probability, I was talking about situations like MAC functions or key search functions, inversion, in which the success of the attacker was very small, and we were borrowing from the security of the original primitive into the final bound. Okay, this square root of epsilon was helping us. But how about an indistinguishability situation, like semantic security? The attacker, the game is that I give you two ciphertexts, right? And you have to decide which plaintext was encrypted. Oh, it's not that one, right? It's that one, yeah. You give me the plaintext, I give a ciphertext. You have to guess which one of the plaintext was encrypted. So here the probability of the success is half plus epsilon. Epsilon is very small, but now the whole thing is half. Okay, so the probability is half. If I use it in the the generalized LHL, all I get is, instead of 2 to the minus L, I get square root of 1 of half times. I mean, not very. Practical people don't care about constants. So it doesn't give us much. However, it turns out that if you work out the details, you can actually claim, even for some semantic, some distinguishability applications, you get something. For example, for public key encryption, you can say that if the attacker's success is half plus epsilon, I mean advantage epsilon, then what you get here is a worsening again of 2 to the minus L over 2, but again with the epsilon half on front of this 2 to the minus L over 2. So we get exactly the same gain in security as with the previous examples. This for public key encryption. For symmetric encryption, you cannot prove this in general, but you can prove it for encryption that are secure against at least 2 encryption queries. If it's secure only against 1 encryption query, this is not necessarily true, but with 2, it's necessarily true. Actually, I tell you more. With 1 query, I mean, things that have secure only under 1 encryption query, this is not secure. This doesn't work. I mean, one-time pad, okay? This doesn't work. You want to derive a key for a PRF, this doesn't work, okay? It works for encryption, it works for MAC, it works for inversion, it works for many things, but for a PRF, this doesn't work, and it probably doesn't work. That's bad, because I wanted this whole thing for a key derivation function, which I needed it for a key for the PRF. Okay, so it's everything very nice if you want these specific applications, but if you want a generic thing like I wanted, this was not very nice. Fortunately, what you can show is that this analysis does apply not to PRF but to weak PRFs, where weak PRF is a PRF that is secure when you apply it. I mean, the adversary only sees inputs on random stuff, and he also gets as a challenge a value, the PRF on random input, and it has to distinguish between random and not random. And actually, for that primitive, you can use the generalized LHL, and this is sufficient to build a key derivation function. So the way we do it is the seed to the extractor now will be a description of a hash function from a suitable pairwise independent family and a random string S, and the way you are going to compute your key is by applying the universal hash function with the H that you chose as your seed applied to a random value S, which is also part of the seed. And this thing you can prove to have the security degradation of the generalized LHL, which is much better than the LHL. And actually, it's enough to move many of these applications from something completely unsatisfactory to something which is quite nice. So it reduces the entropy requirement and decreases the LHL security degradation. Of course, it's still not in Schneider's book, and it still has an issue with when you don't have salt. But if you have a situation in which you want to use it just as a KDF with in half entropy and salt, you are fine. One nice thing of this is that it still requires a long salt because it is the description of a hash function and an input to the WPRF, and we don't like that. So can we do this whole construction with a short salt? So here is a natural idea. Start with a short seed, short salt, random, apply to it a PRG, and get a longer one. But now we are back to the same situation with the PRF with a known key. A PRG with a known seed, there is little you can say about that. But somehow we got to say something. We have a result saying something, it's fine to do that with a PRG. Why it is fine? Because if someone is going to break that scheme, that someone will have a proof of a public key encryption that is security is based only on AES. Okay, so we don't expect to have a public key encryption based on, whose security only depends on AES or any other block cipher. Therefore, this seems secure. This is a very different type of thing than I was talking until now, because when I was talking this generalized LHL, this is real math, okay? This is information theoretic combinatorial thing. Here we are getting more into, crypto stuff, but there is some way of claiming that. Actually, it's a cute trick. And if you want to see more, the Crypto 11 paper, since I have 10 minutes. So let me just advertise this. Originally I thought of doing this talk more of a survey of, but I noticed that I will not have enough time. So let me mention this new work on computational extractors, which will be presented in TCC. And actually, what we show in that paper is that if we go back to the first natural proposal of using PRF with G to the XY as the key, then what we show is actually we justify that construction as long as the key to the PRF is no shorter than the G to the XY value. So you can put the GXY value as the input to the PRF. For example, you have a G to the XY of 256 bits and use it to key SHA-256, then we show actually that we quantify security, And it turns out that if the security is, if the security of the, actually it's a WPRF, if the security of WPRF is large enough, exponential, then you can actually claim, again, a security only based on the assumption of WPRF. This is different with HKDF, we were analyzing specific constructions, specific HMAC-based stuff, okay? Here is any WPRF. So that's nice to know. And there are some other interesting theoretical results on that paper that you may want to read about. And a question which theoretical cryptographers will say, we investigate the fundamental question of whether computational extraction needs one-way functions. And it's trivial to build a computational extractor out of a pseudo-random function, PRG, so one-way functions, because you take a statistical extractor, you output enough bits to seed the PRG, and now you output as many bits as you want with the PRG. So PRGs, or one-way functions, imply extractors. Now, does the existence of a computational extractor imply the existence of one-way function? Of course not, because we have computational extractor. Any statistical extractor is a computational extractor. But if you ask the question about non-trivial statistical extractor, meaning that the output is close to uniform, but statistically far from uniform, okay, then the question makes sense. And the most interesting part of the paper is that we don't answer that question. I mean, we live basically, I mean, we have under some assumption, it's the case, okay, and the assumption is not a cryptographic assumption, it's an assumption about something about the proof in the lower bound of the RT bound on extractors, but really, I mean, it should have been trivial to prove that this implies one-way functions, but we don't know how to do that. And sometimes that's better than, yeah. So, learning from Newton. Okay, so Newton has said this. I don't know, I need someone in English to. Okay, so it's a famous quote of Newton, which, by the way, it was 300 BDH. You know what BDH is? Huh? Before Diffie-Hellman. It was February 5th, 1676. So, if I've seen further, it is by standing on your shoulders without a U of giants. And I would say that if cryptography has reached further, it is by standing on the shoulders of theory. And also, I like this one. It says, truth is ever to be found in simplicity and not in the multiplicity and confusion of things. And my take from this is that, and this is serious, I really like to work on practical stuff, because what practical stuff forces you to do is to do things simple, okay? The proof can be as complicated as you want. It's good if it's correct, but not always. But really, the construction has to be simple. Otherwise it will not be practical. And I love simple stuff, and that's something about the more theoretical people will sacrifice simplicity for the QED. I want to have a proof, so I put all these, machinery, hammers, and then I have a proof. But really, what we want in cryptography is to be, in order to be really practical, we need both. We need the simplicity and we need the proof. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? Comments? Dan.
For the simple universal hash construction, you mentioned the need for a long universal hash key. But why can't you use a short universal hash, like a Johansen-style construction?
So the shortest I know how to get is for 1,000 bits. I mean, there are theoretical constructions that achieve much smaller, but something that if I was going to build something like this using some hash function of yours, for example, I would still need for 1,000 bits of the source input and 128 bits of statistical distance. I would need close to 1,000 bits of. I mean, you are welcome to improve on that, but that's the best. If I had to do that, and I asked people, I couldn't find something better than that. So in theory, yes, you can do less, but if you want the construction to still be very practical, it's safe to need more.
If it's a very short question with a very short answer.
It's a short question, but I don't know, maybe the answer is wrong. So you do all this wonderful theoretical work, and you manage to get it standardized as RFCs. So how do you do that?
You push, and you don't have any respect for yourself.
So you can expand on that in the panel session.
No, I actually think that really this interaction has to come from a place of mutual respect. Okay, you know, saying all these engineers, I mean, my jokes about Schneider, I mean, these are jokes. I mean, really, it has to come from a position of respect. You have to respect these people. You don't have to believe everything they say. They don't have to believe everything I say. But also, I was young and very energetic. I'm less of that now. But actually, I have to say that I'm really happy to see, even though I get older and older compared to the people here, but I really am happy to see so many young people. So, well, maybe in the panel, I'll be more fatherly.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again.